prizing, if it's really prizing, is without agenda. The only agenda is that moment. The only agenda is connection. There's no like, I as the adult am trying to get you to see something. It's I as the adult see something, and yet I could be wrong, and yet I experience something that may matter to you. And I just wanted to let you know that what may matter to you matters to me.
Hello, and welcome to episode 82 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review, tell a friend, help get the word out there. Dr. Mitch Abblett is a private practice clinical psychologist, author, consultant, and national and international speaker. Dr. Ablett's latest book is aimed at parents, educators, and helping professionals. Prizeworthy: How to Meaningfully Connect, Build Character, and Unlock the Potential of Every Child. Dr. Ablett's work has appeared in numerous online and print media such as the New York Times, Newsweek, Tricycle Magazine, and USA Today. His frequent blog posts regarding mindfulness, applications, and family and relationships can be found in Mindful Magazine's companion website, mindful.org. A clinician in the Boston area for over 20 years, he brings a wealth of clinical, administrative, and leadership experience from various settings: hospitals, outpatient clinics, residential facilities, and therapeutic schools, to his practice and consulting. For 11 years, he served as the clinical director of the Manville School at Judge Baker Children's Center in Boston, a Harvard Medical School affiliated therapeutic school program for children and adolescents with emotional, behavioral, and learning difficulties. He's also served as the executive director of the Institute for Mediation and Psychotherapy. He lives with his wife and 2 young children in Newton, Massachusetts. All right. Welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Mitch.
Thanks for having me, David.
It's so good to have you. So we are going to get into your work on mindfulness and your latest book, Prizeworthy, about what it means to be in the moment and prize, especially your children or others. But before we do that, let's talk a little, just tell us about your journey to becoming a clinical psychologist and an author, speaker, podcaster. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Was not the plan originally, as it is for a lot of people, I think. I know the focus or a theme of your podcast around introversion, card carrying on my end, and beyond introversion, which, as you and I have chatted about before, they're not one and the same. I would say undiagnosed like social phobia when I was a kid, and into, I would say up through grad school. And so that really affected what I thought I was going to do. And so like in college, I jumped around majors quite a bit because of the uncertainty as to what I was going to do. And I was poli-sci for a while, and then I was English, and then history, and then back to English. And then I landed on history, and I loved it, still love history. But then toward the end of college, I'm like, okay, now what am I going to do with this? Either I'm going to teach in high school, which should be fine, but it didn't feel right. Go to grad school for history, or I'm going to law school. I'm like, I guess I'll go to law school. And that was about the extent of thought I put into me going to law school, which for a socially phobic, 21-year-old was a disaster. I went to Florida State back in fall of 94, I think. And it was excruciating. And the anxiety went through the roof. So I ended up quitting in the middle of the first year of law school, and I had zero plan as to what I was going to do next. And, it sounds like a made up story, but it's legit the truth. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was depressed, sitting at home watching a morning talk show, with bed head and a bathrobe on, and the Jerry Springer show comes on. And this, back then the FCC wasn't regulating stuff, and so there were melees up on the stage between people. And I remember watching this. I'm like, these people need some help. Wait, who does that? Psychologists do that. I had never taken a psych class. Had no psychologists or therapists in my, network growing up. That was literally, and that's not how I view my patients, obviously now, but it was the original trigger thought. And then I went to the library and did a introvert thing. I got some books on psych, started reading them. I was completely fascinated. And then I got laser focused on getting into grad school. And then I was able to stay at Florida State I had to do a year of post-baccalaureate, psych major stuff and research with a professor to be able to even apply. But I got lucky. I was able to get into the doctoral program in clinical psych at Florida State, and then graduated in 2000. That's what brought me to Boston, was to do my pre-doc internship at the VA here in Boston. So that's what got me into psychology, but it was my suffering aspect, the anxiety that I think I was trying to deal with it at some level by going into law school, but I wasn't ready I didn't have the tools. Got totally flooded, overwhelmed, pulled back, ended up in training as a psychologist, worked on it a bit. I became a teaching assistant and had to get up in front of 200 undergrads and teach intro psych. And that actually, it was exposure therapy. I really, got better with it, but still was not into mindfulness or meditation. I thought it was new age hooey back then. And it was not what my training was. I got into the mindfulness game when I was on the job as a brand new clinical director of a therapeutic school for kids with emotional and behavioral issues here in Boston. This is going back, 17, 18 years. And I was burning out. I was responsible for a staff of 20, and they were facing really tough work. And so I was looking for tools. And I had heard about a branch of psychotherapy, mindfulness-based psychotherapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, and had read a little bit about it. But I began reading more and then bringing it to my client, my work at the school and the small private practice I had. And then, unlike other behavior change stuff as a psychologist, the cognitive behavioral therapy or psychodynamic stuff, I could learn that stuff and then do it with patients. But this was mindfulness was the kind of thing where you can't really do it with someone unless you're doing it yourself, on yourself. So I really started my own personal meditation practice many years ago back then. And that really kind of was a tipping point around the anxiety aspect for me, and just getting more focused on what I wanted to do.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's a great story. So anxiety was overwhelming to go to law school. Still, graduate school to become a psychologist is still very challenging. How did you deal with that as you were going into graduate school for psychology? How did you deal with your anxiety?
Yeah, it was not. One thing I had, I'm going to do the air quotes, so I'm saying it.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to see that. One thing I had going for me that helped in this regard was a hindrance, and many, many others, was my compulsive aspect. There is a strong, and I've been working to channel it into healthier and healthier, manifestations over the years. But when I was a kid, in addition to the social anxiety, I was a silent sufferer from, kind of an unusual form of like OCD. I wasn't doing like the cleaning and checking kind of stuff, but I was compulsive around, school in particular when I was a kid. I would overstudy. It wasn't as bad in elementary school, but I would say middle school, or in Florida, it was called junior high, high school, and then college. Like I was like, people would think I was driven and I was doing really well. Ended up the salutatorian in my college class and whatnot. But it was a lot of suffering pressing me. So that got me to show up to things and just keep going. So there was an upside in terms of getting things done, but a big downside in terms of the pressure I put on myself.
Okay. So it was still an ongoing journey for you when you first started graduate school.
It was still there. The anxiety, social anxiety was still there. As I started teaching, I'm like, oh, wow, I can do this stuff. And I started to kind of, my experience in the moment was not matching the narrative I had in my head about myself. They're going to think I'm stupid. If I get up and talk, I'm going to sound ridiculous. The actual experience was people are responding well to this. And I'm enjoying this. I'm actually excited. And the same kind of body sensations that I had labeled previously as like intense anxiety started to be signs that I'm like, I'm like keyed up. I'm into this. So, I think that got a lot better. But the learning to notice the have to, push, I've called it nexting, always into the next moment. This is where the mindfulness practice has been and continues to be crucial for me, to kind of notice that kind of compulsive push toward something or trying to pull something in, and instead be able to kind of accept what is more and more. So that's ongoing. It's way better than it used to be.
Yeah. So when we talked last, we talked about introversion, and what would you say your strengths are as an introvert, and also what have you really found that you need as an introvert?
Yeah. I appreciate when you and I talked offline about this before, and I've as a psychologist, I've thought about introversion quite a bit. Ended up talking about it a lot with patients of mine, and then for myself, what I found to be a strength of mine around that again is completely outside of the anxiety component is, I really value it, this reflective, I would call it solitude that I end up in, and that I will drop back into that frequently, if not daily, for little pockets, just to, really deeply process and contemplate my experience of things. And then, I have an endless collection of journals, and I've tried journaling on my computer. There's something about like physically writing in a journal and just, capturing what my experience has been, what thoughts are arising, what ideas I have. That seems to be something that is given to me over and over and over again. That I know I didn't invent that. I didn't invent introversion. I didn't invent contemplation. But it also feels awesome to like read like Marcus Aurelius meditations and know that, oh, here is a guy that 2,000 years ago was literally the most powerful person on the planet at the time. And obviously you and I don't know for certain. I'm betting the mortgage money he was an introvert. And
Yeah, right.
he also dialed into reflection and solitude. And, he didn't write that for publication. It was his private journal. And, to feel like you're doing something that has resonated with many, many millions for forever, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's deep thinking is a gift of introverts. And I love how you said that, you have to capture those ideas. That's something that I talk about a lot. And it's like, we have some great ideas and we have to learn to capture those. And I'm excited to get into the mindfulness piece of that too. But that's definitely a gift that we have. There's a lot of misconceptions about introversion. It doesn't mean shy. You can be shy, but you can also overcome shyness or overcome anxiety, like you were talking about. I've overcome shyness and I've overcome anxiety. And mine was really from just understanding my introversion. That did it for me. So, what have you learned that you need as an introvert?
Yeah, the word initially popped in my mind is time. But it feels like it's more than it's like a cadence that I need. I love my family, I love my friends, as I'm sure you likely have experienced and many others, a lot of that or a lot of intensity of that. And I'm like literally internally vibrating in a way that's not comfortable. And I need to move away physically and in time and, space so that I can kind of go in and do the capturing. But it's a cadence. I need things to, go from the won't, 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 and just, it doesn't have to be completely silent, but it has to be intentional. I have to kind of go into my intentional, reflective, meditative space. And it doesn't have to be for long, but I do need that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said that. I love and need my family, my friends. I'm enjoying this conversation that we're having right now. I've been looking forward to it. But yeah, I need some time. Every day I need some time, and sometimes I need longer periods of time, but we all as humans need connection too. It might just look different between introverts and extroverts. So I love how you said that.
Yes.
So you've written and speak a lot about mindfulness. Tell us what is that? What is mindfulness?
Can't be put into words.
Okay.
So I could just sit here and then people will be like, what? But, it is an experience that is intentional. That it's kind of like I was just saying, it's an intentional dropping in and out. And, the standard verbal definition, and it's a good one, Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition, paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. And I think that has some key elements in it. It has the intentionality, the mind's attention mechanism is in the now. And it's letting go of the labeling, critical, judging mind and just more in a raw way observing what is. So that's the best that can be done, I think, with words. What I've done when I've done live trainings, I've done this many times. I have different versions of a video clip where I'll ask people like you did, what is mindfulness? And some people will say stuff. And then I will basically, via them, arrive at the Jon Kabat-Zinn definition. And then inevitably, if you have a large group of people are writing it down. And then I will notice people writing it down. And I'll say, everybody that's been writing down this definition, take your pen or your pencil right now and cross it out. No offense to John, but go ahead and cross it out. And now just sit for a second, and now watch this video. And I would show a video of, it was like from a newsreel. I grabbed it off of YouTube years ago. This little boy who looked like he's about 4 or 5, who was one of the first successful cochlear implant patients. And so he, I think he had been born deaf, but this implant has been, he had it inserted, and now it's turned on for the first time. And now his father says his name, and he hears it physically for the first time. And it's that moment of complete recognition of the novelty in that moment. And I'll pause the video. Mindfulness. That kid's mind is in the now. The dad's mind is in the now. And what about yours? Is there any judgment? Is there any wondering about next? So, it's really easy. People have been mindful many times, even if they haven't meditated.
Yeah, so it doesn't always mean like meditation, right?
Yeah, that's the typical misnomer, is that mindfulness equals the form of practice, which is meditation. But mindfulness is traditionally, and going way back before John, thousands of years, it is a state of experience.
What's the problem when we're not mindful? What does that look like?
It is doing what our brains are wired to do, which is, our brains, according to most, modern neuroscientists, there's a lot of misnomer out there about the brain. There's a lot of confusion, the whole triune brain, like that we have the humans have the evolved forebrain, and then there's the reptilian brain. That is that's an error. It's a misnomer about the brain. It's been perpetuated even by people in my field, even still. Current neuroscience would say that our brain is an anticipation machine, and it's constantly processing, anticipating what the body needs and coordinating via this network. And really, instead of like thinking in terms of like parts of the brain and structures of the brain, it's more like this massively intricate network. And it's never off. It's even, it's all until the moment we die. It's constantly interacting with itself. And so our brain is constantly regulating and anticipating the body's needs, and it's filtering and anticipating threat and promise of reward or food or whatever from the environment. And that's what it's supposed to do. So it's not that it's bad or wrong. It's that, we now live in a world where, yes, there are dangers and whatnot, but, we have most of us, a relative luxury of time and space and, safety and most basic needs met, that, unlike our Paleolithic ancestors, we can meditate, and we can actually hover our minds in the present moment in a way that would have been dangerous to do so in eons ago. And so what we're realizing, our society, though, has developed according to what our brain is wired to do: anticipate things, try and grab rewards, avoid punishment, react based on the needs of the ego, the self. And so the world around us is a proliferation of what our brain is wired to do. The thing is, it's going to be our own demise if we don't learn to really rewire the brain intentionally to not just be reactive, to just not think self versus other. It's kind of a nuanced thing. It's hard to describe, but it's not that it's like good or bad. It's our brains create distinctions and separations because that's what they're wired to do. And this is where I'm biased, obviously, but mindfulness practice, and we know this from neuroscience, it changes the structure of the brain. It decreases these tendencies toward immediately seeing borders and boundaries and me versus them, changes the way we relate to pain. It changes us from empathic reactivity. A lot of the parents I work with will over empathize with their kids. And it leads to a kind of tunnel vision where they don't see things clearly. And then they end up being too reactive to the kid or to others around their kid, versus what comes from meditation, which is compassion. So instead of empathy, which can have a serious downside, and there's research on this, not just me making it up, compassion is being able to be with others' pain. It's literally the compassion, with pain, but also spaciously, like you see their pain, you feel their pain, but you also see everything else. And so you can respond versus just react. And so this is where, we're with practice, we can actually evolve ourselves away from the brains that we inherited to be able to see less separation. That feels relevant to me these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does somebody start down that path if they're not being mindful? Probably it's a long journey, but how do you start down the path?
You just start. I'm living proof there's no perfection with this stuff. I told you before we started, my book is on like prizing kids. I've worked with kids with problematic behavior for over 20 years. And I snapped and lashed out at my son this morning. And so, the practice is the willingness and intention to practice. And a big piece of that is I just messed that up. Let me come back to practice again. What I did, it's interesting this morning, it wasn't horrible, but I got mad when he was ridiculous with me, my son, and I set a limit, which was appropriate, but I was angry. And so my tone was overly angry, and I think it hurt his feelings. And, I remember getting in the car, he was quiet. I could kind of see in the rearview mirror, he was upset. And that's when I tried to practice a bit. I noticed what was showing up in me, and the narrative of I'm sick of him doing this stuff, when he needs to just realize cause and effect, and the effect of his behavior on it. It's all true. And the more I adhered to that and create a separation, me, him, I was missing what I call the prize in him in that moment, which was he was, emotionally feeling disconnected from me and probably ashamed. Part of it is that you just never know exactly what the other person's truth is, but it's the intention to be curious that is mindful. So I reached back while I was driving and put my hand near where he was. And it took him a solid minute before he took my hand. It didn't mean I took the limit away. He still lost his iPad for a while when he gets home today from camp. Yeah. But I wanted him to know that I was there and that I realized that he was upset. So ain't no perfection in there, but it's the showing back up with the intention to see behind another's behavior that they have a need, They may have been unskillful about how they were behaving, but that is, I mean, I give that as an example. That's like everyday stuff for people. And you just keep being willing to be curious. What am I missing if I keep buying into the chatter in my head, my narrative? If I just keep reacting based on the heat of my feelings in the moment versus let me be curious about what I need. Let me listen to my mind without believing it. And then how can I show up to others?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's so important to remember that it's a journey and we're not perfect. I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, but we can continue to get better and live more in the moment with ourselves and with the other really important people in our lives, like you're talking about.
Yep.
So your latest book, I'm going to read the whole title here, Prizeworthy: How to Meaningfully Connect, Build Character, and Unlock the Potential of Every Child. So you've been talking a little bit about this. What is prizing?
It's mindfulness of the moment of interaction. In the book, it's focused on kids, like a parent to kid or teacher to kid or clinician to kid. But as I was telling you before we started, I really intended the book originally and continue to view it as it's like a paradigm for the moment of interaction with another. And I chose the term and used the term prizing very intentionally because I want to make a distinction from praise. Praise can be a really good thing. But praise, as usual, tends to have an agenda to it, like particularly if it's an adult to a kid. Hey, kid, do more of that thing. I, as the adult, want you to do more of that, so I'm praising you for that. It has an inherent hierarchy to it. And not always, but often it can be done in a kind of from a control agenda that the kid can perceive as condescending, and they feel the control of even praise. And it can therefore create the separation between, the two people. And there's tons of research on their downsides of praise, not just with kids. Prizing, if it's really prizing, is without agenda. The only agenda is that moment. The only agenda is connection. There's no like, I as the adult am trying to get you to see something. It's I as the adult see something, and yet I could be wrong, and yet I experience something that may matter to you. And I just wanted to let you know that what may matter to you matters to me. And it can be done with words. It can be a gesture, like me putting my hand back to my son when he was upset. It is a gift of presence from one person to the other. I am here in my experience, in my present moment truth, and I'm willing to be curious and accepting of whatever yours is. Doesn't mean you don't set limits if you're dealing with a kid, or if you have a coworker who's being ridiculous. Doesn't mean that you don't set a boundary. You can say you have a truth over there, or something is not right for you, or I may have done something I missed, and here's what's not working for me. That can still be a prizing move. So it's a way of seeing and a way of acting. In addition to the distinction from praise, I think in the West in particular, we tend to have a view of prizes. We have a prize-focused society. Like, I want to get mine. I want to get my prize. And though I don't expect this book in and of itself is going to do it, it's an attempt to highlight the problem with a prize focused external in paradigm, and to instead, like, the real prize, the reframe prize is here in the now between us. It's the space joining us.
So I think you made a really good distinction for me just now. It's like with praising, if I'm praising you, I'm saying, thank you, you did something that matters to me. But I may not be acknowledging what matters to you. And those things can be very different. And I know I've experienced that. I still experience that, where I do want people to understand what matters to me, not just be a matter of what somebody else is expecting. It's really kind of seeing that person for their uniqueness and their gifts and that type of thing. Is that how you're seeing this?
Yeah, that's really well put, Dave. That's exactly it. And it seems like I'm splitting hairs, but I think then that hair split is all the difference. I think even the kids that I've worked with massive social pragmatics and processing and emotional issues, they can feel if you're showing up to prizing on the one side of the hair or praise on the other. They can feel where you're not resonating in mindful curiosity as to what may matter to them as them, letting go of what your perceptions and agendas are. I think they can feel it. And I think the vast, vast majority of people can feel that. And it's what makes all the difference. You know, it is a skill. I don't think it's something that some people are just born able to do. Oh, some people can do the prizing thing, some people can't. That's like saying, well, some people are empathic and some people aren't. Prizing is something I had to learn to do. Even though I've always been an empathic individual, I had to actually learn to dial down my empathy to not overfeel other people in order to start resonating in what I would call prizing. And that is a skill. I think it's very learnable.
Yeah. So how do we do that? Because I think that I've come a long way. I think I've developed the skill a little bit. I'm definitely not perfect. I have a lot more to go, but how do we develop that skill of prizing?
So I
Coming
think,
across as authentic and
yeah, I was just using it when working with some parents last week in my office. I think it's in the book. I can't remember if it made it through the final copy edits. But I heard Jane Goodall speak, the primatologist, some years ago. And I, from a distance have followed her work. And when people ask this, like, how do you begin to, how did she do what she did? How did she go from being a scientist who wanted to get in there with the chimps in the wild to actually discovering things that no one else had discovered? Very smart, people in her field. She got super willing to mess up over and over again. She had this burning intention to keep showing up and to keep letting go of her agendas and her assumptions and just keep observing, noticing, and getting herself out of the way so that those chimps felt by her. Their normal protective, like, threat mechanisms took weeks and weeks, months and months for them to actually view her as part of them, part of their we. And then she learned all kinds of stuff that no one else had learned before. That, in my mind, is the analogy. How do you show up? There's no hack. There's no like.
Oh, you're supposed to give us a hack.
Yeah. The hack is to sit and start noticing. You're everyone listening is going to have interactions today that you will be missing stuff. And if you just set an intention of you're still going to be talking and doing, You're not going to be able to say, hey, I'm going to go over here and sit on a cushion and observe for 15 minutes. You can still be an interaction, but just set the intention. What is it that I can notice without just reacting? Notice in your own body and mind. That's super important. What are the thoughts that pop for me when so-and-so is doing stuff? What's the surge in my body or the subtle in my body? And then what seems to matter to them, for them, that I might tend to miss. If you do that occasionally, you are going to notice stuff.
And I like how you said that sometimes, we just need to get out of the way too, take ourselves out of it. So I think that's tough for most everybody to do.
There is a pathological public health crisis, in my opinion, of an inability to own error in our society. I have to be right. I can't be publicly viewed as wrong. And, it's one of the reasons why I try to, in almost every public appearance, give an example of me being wrong. And then I'll ask people sometimes, like, even though I just shared this Mitch F up story, what happens to your view of my credibility in this moment? Is it, you tell me honestly, and people will say it, there's more credibility. So even though that's our pretty universal experience of someone, if they're authentically owning an error that impacts others, we have this conditioning that I can't acknowledge that publicly. And I view it as a major reason why we're so stuck, that we can't just be in interaction with each other and say, you know what, I messed that up, or I could be wrong here, or I'm confused. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. We're so worried that is going to impact our credibility. But I love how you said it really gives us more, it really gives us more credibility.
Yeah.
Something profound in your book you wrote that just really jumped out at me. You said pain was an energy. What does that mean?
It's something, it's a message, it's a messenger, that something needs to be attended to in the body-mind system. And by metaphor, it's like the check engine light on the dashboard. And it's not bad, even though it's aversive to feel it. I can't remember the name of it. There is a specific disorder where people cannot feel physical pain, and it's life-threatening. They have to basically live in a bubble with 24/7 supervision, or they'll get hurt. They'll hurt themselves. So we need pain. And it is, there's physical pain, there's emotional pain. The brain itself doesn't make much distinction as to the, source. Pain is pain, and it's an energy. It literally becomes an energy in our, it's not the thing that caused it in the environment. It becomes an energy moving through our system. How we relate to it determines so much for us. It's understandable we want pain to go away, but if we learn to relate to it and bring awareness to it, it can teach us as to what those prizes are that can really open up our lives. What is this pain telling me?
Right. And your book is definitely focused on parenting or for teachers or caregivers. And we don't want our kids to be in pain.
No.
But pain is a part of life. And, I was thinking about this over the pandemic, and I watched, my own kids go through that. And how do you teach them about pain? And as you wrote in your book, the messages that you get from pain, how do you teach kids about that? Because they haven't had the life experiences that we've had yet.
Yeah. The knee jerk in me is to say that it ain't going to come from a lecture from us about what we've experienced with pain or how to deal with pain. the real teaching, the real parenting is we show up to that moment with them when they are in pain. And as I'm sure you read in the beginning of my book, we play peekaboo with it like we do with a baby.
Right.
I see you experiencing that. And this is where it sounds like empathy, but a lot of parents in particular will then go too far with their empathy and try and make the boo-boo, make the pain go away. I'm not saying you don't offer caring support, but the prizing stance would have you messaging to them, peekaboo, I see that there's that pain. It matters to me that you're in that pain. It matters to me how you view that pain. It matters to me what you choose to do in this next moment. And I'm here. And then it may also be sharing your experience in that moment. Like, it's hard for me to see you in pain. And I've got my pain. I can hang out with this. That doesn't get messaged enough. I had a parent and a son in my office within the past week, and the mom got choked up. And I could, as I've seen thousands of times, she was then going into hyperdrive, into the lecturing mode, telling him what he needed to be doing. And I had to bring her back to noticing that message of pain that was showing up. So I'm watching her struggle to stay, and then I'm watching her son noticing her struggle to stay in it. And I was trying to foster the conditions where she could stay in her pain, and by doing so, model for her son, it's okay to do that. I'm willing to do that because this matters to me, to show you more and more that I'm willing to be in my experience of pain. It doesn't mean that we divulge everything that's raw for us to our kids or to others, but there's a sense of wisdom that comes from practice. Yeah, this one's okay. It's okay for them to see me struggle. And then by letting them see me struggle, I'm not actually struggling in the way that I have in the past. I'm actually kind of holding it, caring for that pain. And then they're seeing that. That's the real parenting.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Just really learning to be there with them, with their pain, and understanding it's their pain. It's not exactly like you might be experiencing it.
That's right. They may be, each of your kids may be half of you genetically, right? That's, if they're your biological kids, that's the case. And yet that doesn't mean that they're experiencing anything close to what you're experiencing of them. And,
right.
And I just, as a therapist working with kids that have been traumatized, neglected, various different psychological disorders, that has been the master key in my toolkit. Just to keep over and over, like, what's that there in you? I could be wrong over here. I might be missing things. You have to teach me about what matters to you. And kids, they're not used to that. Adults are not used to that from another. Increasing in my practice is shifting more toward like coaching, professionals and whatnot. All of this stuff that we're talking about applies like someone in a boardroom. And I have CEOs and entrepreneurs I work with where they're learning seemingly for the first time how to really be present with themselves and others, even though they're highly, air quotes, successful in the world.
Yeah, let's talk about that just for a second. So how do you learn to be present with yourself? How do you develop that self-compassion?
It's like you have to be Jane Goodall with yourself. This is, by the way, where I think introverts can have an advantage at times. We have that, in general, reflective capacity. And it can go the other way, right? Where the reflective capacity can become rumination.
Yes.
and get on a negative train about the self, and then that's a real problem. It can then lead to things like disorders of depression or high levels of anxiety. And yet, like a professional who then can pause and Jane Goodall themselves, but from a mindfulness perspective, I call it momentology. It's not, like studying the moment and then participating in the moment. And you can really start to notice, oh yeah, there's that habit in me again. There's that mental story again. And the more you notice it, it's like, mindfulness is like a universal solvent. It's like water. And it will, like water, not immediately, melt it, but it'll work on it. And I just think you as an adult can start to just notice yourself with a more of a space, internal space. So that instead of like kind of holding my hand up close to my face, instead of your reactions feeling like this, covering your eyes and whatnot, you can, I see you reaction. And this is different than the hacks around, certain kind of breathing practices. It's a perceptual paradigm. It's a way of learning to see.
Yeah, that's great. And we need to learn that for ourselves, but for everybody else to learn to, like you said, I see you, I see what you're going through, all of that. And we just need to somehow get that out to everybody, Mitch.
Yeah. Well, I think there is a growing swell of people that are curious. There's certainly mindfulness is a big deal. John Kabat-Zinn's one of the people that we need to thank. That he really brought it into the mainstream in healthcare, and yet it's getting kind of co-opted by the commercial aspect. So we need ways of honoring the moment with each other, and there I think there is a growing swell. Despite all the evidence of turmoil and separation and disconnection, I think if we just keep showing up to these small moments, they end up rippling out.
Absolutely. So what's your latest project? What are you most excited about now?
Well, I knew you would ask that because podcast hosts always ask me that. I have been working on developing a lot of stuff. And then pretty recently I was like, I'm not sure I want to do all of that. And to be honest, it was like some of the course stuff I was thinking of putting together, maybe I'll return to it. Even my own podcast, which I love doing. I haven't been doing a writing project in a while. And since that book came out, Prizeworthy. And I was noticing that the constant kind of social media posting and some of the repurposing of old material as blog posts and trying to create course stuff was getting sticky for me and making it harder to drop back into the space that is most true for me. So I've been kind of hitting pause on a lot of that, very recently. And it's interesting because as I've done that, a writing project idea has arrived that is, I've already kind of alerted my agent, like, hey, I'm thinking about this. And so she and I are going to talk about it. But, what's cool is that I'm not super focused on like making it happen or trying to control an outcome. It would be about, kind of learning to, in myself, but then also, try and teach what I've been learning about sidestepping the mental screw job of selfhood and be able to kind of sidestep the self-help, self-improvement, personal growth train that so many of us seem to get stuck on.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Mitch, this has been a wonderful conversation. I could go on for much longer, but Where can people find out more about your books or the work that you're doing?
Yeah, my website is the nexus of all things my work. www.drmitchablett.com.
Sounds good. And I'll add that to the show notes too.
Cool.
Well, thanks again, Mitch. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciated having you on. It's a very important conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the website quietandstrong.com. It includes blog posts, links to social media channels, and send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including your 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. You can also purchase the full report if you'd like more details. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.